Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with my friend Paul Barnett from the US. We're going to be talking a little bit about PEDs. Not something I really dive much into because it's not something I know much about. Admittedly, yeah, bodybuilders do use PEDs. What I do doesn't really matter. What Paul does not matter. But hopefully you can provide some context with what might be useful for you, how you might start and how you might actually use some safer use principles and safer use models to apply to your own stuff. Now, I'm not advocating for anything in regards to PEDs on this channel. If you want to get in touch with Paul, all his show notes, all his information will be in the show notes below in the description box. Otherwise, ask him. He's a guy that knows a lot more than me. Asking me is, I'm admitting my ignorance here, guys. So, don't keep asking me. I don't know much about it. But anyway, Paul, so you're currently competing at some point soon, in the very near future. You're in your off-season to pre-contest phase right now. I was quite curious in terms of what you did in your off-season phase, how heavy you got up to, what you used, and how things have changed since then in regards to getting in better shape, leaning down. Does your training change, diet change much? And also, does your PED use change at all?
So I competed in the end of November and at a national show, and I won the super heavyweights. And I was in the finals for the overall. I was, there in the top four on stage. I think, I was in, at least the judges told me I was in one of the final for the pro card. So I was close. Since then, it's been a short off season. So really only like about a 4-month off season. So I didn't really push this year. A lot of times I'll push my weight back up. I competed at around 240, high 230s, around 240. On stage, and usually I'll push back up to like 275, 280. But since I only had 4 months off, I pushed the PEDs pretty hard going into the show. I felt like my body just needed to take an exhale to breathe a little bit, and I just backed off and did TRT for essentially about three of those months. A lot of times what I'll do post show is run a rebound. And I think this is a mistake that a lot of people make coming out of shows. I will see guys screw up royally coming out of shows, and they'll just come off all the PEDs and fat burners cold turkey and then start eating like complete trash. They go on a binge eating rage post show. And that sets you up for an environment where you're going to have rapid fat gain. And I differ from a lot of other coaches and a lot of other people in the bodybuilding world where they will say that you need to come off and clean out and all this stuff. And I actually think it probably makes things worse. Because what ends up happening if you pull the hormones and the fat burners immediately after the show, you're going to set yourself up for an environment where you're pulling all your androgens down. You're going to have an estrogen rebound. You're going to be in an estrogen dominant environment. You're also setting yourself up to have a crash of your metabolism from a lot of times guys just immediately stop doing cardio. Guys will immediately come off the fat burners, and then your metabolism's completely shut down and you're eating in an excessive caloric surplus. It's just a horrible situation to get fat. And I think a lot of people make that mistake. Whereas if you're intelligent about it, usually what I'll do post show is pull out all the toxic compounds, things like tren, orals, cut the doses of the other stuff in half. Usually I'll just run something like test and primo or test and master on about half what I was running on contest prep, very low doses. And I'll taper the fat burners down over probably about a 2 to 3 week period of time. And I taper the cardio down over a 6-week period of time coming out of the show. And if you do that and you increase your food intake, and you stick to eating clean foods, if you can keep yourself disciplined. I don't reverse diet. I go hard back into a caloric surplus because I think most people are going to be in such a compromised situation coming out of a show that if they try to reverse diet, this is a little bit controversial. Some people disagree with this. It's a different take. My take is that people are going to probably cheat anyway. Ghrelin always wins. So if you're, rather than slamming pizza and cheeseburgers post show, why not eat good, clean food post show in a caloric surplus? Keep your PEDs in place, taper off the fat burners and the in the cardio, and do that over a 6 to 8 week period of time. And a lot of times what I'll see is guys will actually rebound back up to their previous off-season weight, but at a much leaner body fat percentage, where I've done it over and over and over again. You can go to my channel and you can see where I had 2 years ago, I had an epic rebound where I put on like 70 pounds, and I jumped from a light heavy to a super heavy in 1 year. It was crazy. I've seen people do it over and over and over again. And then after that 6 to 8 week period of time, you have a small window there where you can gain muscle. It seems to be there's some sort of super compensation that goes on. I don't know the physiology of exactly what happens. It's probably because insulin sensitivity is high. I have no evidence of it, but I speculate that coming out of a contest that you are myostatin is probably low. I also would guess that gastric emptying is going to be at an all-time high, so your ability to eat and process food is going to be at an all-time high since you've been limited. So it's a perfect opportunity for growth. It's also can be a perfect opportunity to get fat.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I'm smiling throughout that because I've had exactly the same experience. In the nutrition space, there's a lot about reverse dieting, taking 20, 24, 28 weeks to get back to baseline. I'm not a fan of that either. I think you should get back to your normal cruising body weight where you feel strong, you're able to progress in terms of muscle mass. I don't think that there's any need to rush it. So I'm not saying to people, you need to gain 30 pounds with the first, week. Just say it as you gain as much weight as you can do safely without impacting your blood pressure and other blood markers. But yeah, I've done the same thing over, 6 to 8 weeks, get back to baseline body weight. And the thing is, you'll still be hungry until you're at the body fat that you're at when you start dieting anyway, because you've just gone through all that time of going downwards. Until you get to your baseline, wherever that might be. Some people hang around 8 to 10%. Me, I hang around about 15% body fat in the off season. Until I'm there, I don't feel good again. So, why waste time and dwindle? And, so I've had the same experience, and I would theorize it's the same as what you said about, ghrelin, leptin, and perhaps some sort of element of myostatin with it as well. So now you're kind of leaving the reverse dieting phase for what it's worth. How are you setting up your drug cycle, or the blood tests you might have between that? Is there a clear out period? What happens after, the rebound sort of phase?
So during the rebound, I'll start to taper down the PEDs. I don't come down rapidly. So I'll taper it. I look at that 6 week period of time as sort of a transition into a health and maintenance phase. And you'll listen to your body. There's some people that they come out of a show and they just need a break completely. But I would say probably 75% can catch that rebound pretty effectively. And you sort of touched on it yourself. Your body will let you know. You'll know your body will, if you listen to your body, if you see your blood pressure rising rapidly, if you see water retention getting out of control, if you see rapid fat gain, you know that you need to pull back and change things. Your body will tell you what it needs to do. And I think that's a lesson that I've learned as I've gotten older. I was really crappy about listening to my body and just pushed through things. And that was probably not the smartest approach when I was younger. I had this mentality of I had to be tough and push through things. And that got me in trouble more than it helped. I'm not saying that you shouldn't push, but if you listen to your body, if you listen to those things such as health markers changing, inflammation changing, that'll tell you when it's time to pull back. But I generally have found it's around 6 to 8 weeks post-show. And then I'll taper into a TRT phase. Probably 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer, just depending on where you're at. And then what I'll do is at that 6 or 8 weeks mark, I'll get blood markers checked and do some diagnostic testing to see where things are. And we may need more time to get back to baseline. We may be okay to transition into an off season. You'll know, like this year, I really, my blood work was a little off. I was just not feeling 100% because I'd pushed really hard for 10 months straight. I needed that whole entire 4 months. I took 16 weeks and just kind of just coasted and let my body breathe to set myself up for the next show. That's the big thing with bodybuilding. People get very impatient. You have to play the long-term game with this stuff. It's the same thing like with people wanting to shortcut things by taking more toxic compounds. For some reason, people have this concept in their head that the worse something makes you feel, the better it is for making you grow. I never understood that. You know, it's like I'm going to blast Tren and DHB all off season, feel like shit, and that's making progress. Side effects are not effects, you know. So that's, you know, if you're sick, you're not going to be in a good environment to grow. So that is the objective, to get yourself healthy. And then you can transition into an off-season phase. And usually what I'll do is I keep things very basic. I tend in the off-season, you know, so if my health checks out, my approach for the off-season is to taper up as I go into the off-season. I found if you jump straight into a full-blown blast, a lot of times there's going to be rapid water gain. People see the scale go up and they associate that with, man, I'm getting huge, but you're not synthesizing 10, 15, 20 pounds of new muscle in 6 weeks. If you start a cycle up, that's just water. It's just inflammation. It's water, and it's your body getting adjusted to the compounds. To me, that's not productive. So I want to try to hold off and prevent that from happening. I want to keep the side effects as low as I can in the off season, so I could extend my off season as long as possible and get that growth. I mean, realistically, when we think about it, I mean, how much muscle are you going to grow in a year? I know I said I had that rebound. A lot of that was just, you know, I'd been bigger when I was younger. Some of it was just glycogen. You know, a lot of it was not actual real tissue, right? Real muscle tissue, real protein structures. I mean, at the best, you're probably looking at, you know, unless you're just newbie gains, you're probably looking at something like 5 to 10 pounds a year.
Sure,
realistically. But I want to transition into that off season. I want to use the safest compounds that I can tolerate the best. I want to taper up as appropriate, use an appropriate dose to make progress. So if I'm making progress, I don't push doses up. I leave the doses the same. Compound choices that I like for an off season, I keep things very basic. I use testosterone and growth hormone. Both are bioidentical hormones. We know how they are metabolized in the body. We know what they reduce to. They're predictable. And then I'll throw in an anabolic on top of it that I tolerate well. For me, it's primobolan. I found that I tolerate primobolan very well. And then generally, I know people love to use orals in the off season. I tend to stay away from orals. When I was younger, I used to use a lot of them. And you'll talk to a lot of professional bodybuilders as they used orals when they were younger in the off season. And then as they get older, they stop using them because everybody eventually comes to the same conclusion. They destroy your stomach. Your liver becomes stressed. And when your liver's stressed, you have zero appetite. And if you can't eat and you feel sick, how are you going to grow? So, and there's always some negative impact on lipids from using orals in the off season. So that is another consideration too. So if you're running a higher fat diet, I know you're a carnivore guy. So if you're running a higher fat diet, you have to be very, very careful with the lipid skewing that the oral steroids seem to cause. So that is another compelling reason not to use them or limit their use during the off season. If I were to deploy an oral in the off season, I would run it towards the end and then just on training days. And usually I'll run something mild like Anavar. I used to love Anadrol and D-ball and shit like that when I was younger. But to me, those are just temporary gains. They're not real tissue. People will see the bloat from D-ball and think that it's real tissue. It's not real tissue. They'll see the temporary strength gains from Anadrol. It's not really muscle gain. It's CNS motivation. So, you know, they are tools. I look at every PED as a tool in the toolbox. There are appropriate times to use those tools, but really for growth, to set up an environment for growth, you want to maintain your health. You want to be as healthy as possible while you're pushing that growth and be able to eat. So if you're healthy, if you can eat, and if you can train hard, that's going to set up an environment for growth. And I want to structure my cycles as such to make that possible.
Absolutely, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Paul. I like the sort of emphasis on using the smallest amount possible, then ramping things up. then a lot of people probably listening to this are thinking, you alluded to it already, but if I use Dianabol, Arnold used 50 milligrams a day or something, it'll say online, gain 20 pounds in 4 weeks. You won't gain 20 pounds in 4 weeks. I respond pretty well to training when I started training, and I did not gain 20 pounds in 4 weeks. It took me probably a year to gain that much. So it just goes to show, doesn't it? But one of my thoughts was to give the users a bit of context. Now, I'm 28, nearly 29 years old. I've been training since the age of about 13, 14 years old. I exceeded natural, genetic, scientific limitations, drug-free. So I exceeded what the high level of what a standard would be, apparently, according to different measurements I did. And obviously, it doesn't mean I'm a pro bodybuilder. There's a genetic element to like how we look and structure and that sort of thing. But what I will say is, I've been using different things now for about a decade, something like that. And I've not quadrupled my gains since I was, competing and training naturally. So I think it'd be interesting because we're both about 6'1". How long have you been using gear, and how long have you been training? And would you say it's like put you, to the upper echelon where you're like, oh, I've gained 60 pounds because of gear? Or is it just helped you a bit along the way? Like that's what I'm interested in. How much you think it's helped?
There's, when it comes to gear and response to gear, some of it's genetics. I see a wide variety of people. There are people that are hyper responders, and there are people that are non-responders. Most people are somewhere in the middle. There's genetic outliers on both ends. Most people are genetically average. And so you're going to see average results from the PED. Your best cycle is always going to be your first cycle, which is going to probably be the lowest amount you ever run. I dabbled a little bit when I was a teenager, just like took some D-ball or some, I'm like college, like 19, 20 years old. I took some D-ball. I don't know, like 6 weeks of it or something. Somebody handed me some D-ball, and I took a little bit of it, but I didn't really do a proper cycle until I was 28, I think. So I trained off and on for really 10 years as a natural before I ever touched anything. My best gains were on my first cycle, which was 250 milligrams a test. And that was it, man.
TRT plus.
That's what you'll hear from most people. Whereas now, I'm running well over a gram, and I don't, I might eke out a few pounds a year from that. It seems like the road up to your genetic limit is quick, but pushing past that is a slog. So I think that's where you'll see it. Like, you'll see people that are genetically gifted, they usually get big pretty quick. And you'll see it. Like I heard, my coach, Justin Harris, talks about, I don't know, I guess this is out there now, so I can share this, but he competed in a national show against Phil Heath. And, we all know who Phil Heath is, former Mr. Olympia. And hopefully Phil doesn't mind me sharing the story, but Justin said he was backstage and he saw Phil and he was like, holy shit, this guy's going to be Mr. Olympia someday. And he said they were all shooting the shit and talking. And Phil was asking everybody what they were taking. And Justin was like, well, what are you taking? And he goes, oh, you ever heard of this stuff called DECA? And he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I've been taking 300 milligrams of it for 6 weeks. And Justin's just like, I knew right then that I was never going to be Mr. Olympia. He's like, literally, the first time he had taken steroids was when he won his pro card. So, and you hear those stories of Ronnie Coleman. He was supposedly, and from what I gather, it was true from talking to people that know him, that he was completely natural when he turned pro. I mean, he was only like 220, and he ended up competing at 290, so that tracks. But you'll know how you respond the first time you ever take anything. I feel bad because I have run into guys that are non-responders. They literally can run 3 times what I do and not, they don't seem to grow at all. Now, I do think a lot of that has to do with diet. A lot of that has to do with training. While PEDs, they do work. I'm not going to be the guy that sits here and says I'm got the 270 on TRT. That's not the case, man. I mash the gas pedal down sometimes. You'll hear like I hear Chris Bumstead talking about how he only runs 500 milligrams of testosterone. I'm sure that's all he runs now because he doesn't have to get any bigger. But I'm sure when he pushed and turned pro, that there was some significant amounts of stuff that were run. But generally, the guys that have good genetics are going to respond to very low doses. The guys that have crap genetics do not. And there's really not a way to brute force your way around it. I will say this, having coached people, I've been doing this for 30 some years. I will say this, I often see people that have crap diets and are running a ton of gear, and I'll actually lower their PEDs, get their diet structured and cleaned up, and then they start making progress.
Yeah.
I do think, and it's sort of a controversial take, I have my Maslow's hierarchy of needs for bodybuilding, for growing, for hypertrophy. And I think at the base of that pyramid, for me, is nutrition. If your nutrition is not locked in, it doesn't matter what you take. It doesn't matter how you train. I've seen plenty of guys in the gym that train hard. I've seen plenty of guys in the gym that take tons of PEDs that look like shit and don't make progress. You get those same guys on a structured diet where they're weighing and measuring, an intelligent diet, whatever it may be. There's many different ways to skin the cat. But once they are on a structured nutrition plan and aware of their nutrition, then they start making progress. That's what I've seen over and over. So I'm not trying to discount the PEDs. They work. They are a tool. They are a tool in the toolbox, but they don't fix a crappy diet. They don't fix crappy training. So if you don't have your training locked down, if you don't have your diet locked down, they are not going to fix that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I have this time and time again with my clients. When it comes to nutrition, that seems to be the cornerstone of, I'd say actually the main pillar of everything they get wrong. So they'll send me what they're currently eating over like a week. I'll work it out, the macros sort of thing, as accurately as I can. Then all I do is basically put them on the same diet that they've been doing in terms of macros for about 2 weeks. Just refine it a little bit, improve it a little bit. If they struggle with certain issues, I'll, taper the food in certain directions, just little tweaks. Within a week of doing that, they'll, drop some body fat, or they feel stronger, their head's clearer. And the reality is that what they weren't doing was consistent, and they probably weren't tracking everything they're eating. Unless they're like bodybuilders like us that just do the same thing over and over again, they're not going to realize how inconsistent they are. And it's amazing to me. It's almost easy money because I just get them to do something which they tell me that they're already doing. But because they're accountable, they're doing the same thing every day, and you can easily pinpoint where the problem is. I want to touch a little bit on training, like especially, I mean, when it comes to training in the off season versus pre-contest, are there certain things you look at? Are there certain changes you might make in terms of volume, frequency, or is it just what built the muscle is what keeps the muscle, or,
I've evolved. My concepts on this have evolved. I have trained every freaking way you can possibly train over the years. I was a pretty strong HIIT advocate when I was younger. I did a lot of, I would say, I did a lot of DC training. I don't know if you're familiar with DC training. Dante Trudel. It's a HIIT training program, sort of like I don't know. He would characterize that, but it's along the lines of like Dorian Yates style of training. I did that when I was younger. I found as I've gotten older that I have to be more intelligent with my training. I can't be trying to beat the logbook every time I get into the gym. I have to be very mindful of load and how it impacts my joints. I'm 50 years old now, and I'm still out there competing. I was beating guys that were, I won a show where I beat guys half my age, when they open, right? So I'm doing something right. But I think your training needs to evolve as you advance, and advance your, when you're brand new, first in the gym, there's a couple fundamentals I do think that are important. I think a lot of guys get confused what their objective is. Like they identify as they want hypertrophy, but yet they train like a CrossFitter or a powerlifter. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with training like a powerlifter or a CrossFitter. If that's what you want to do, that's fantastic. Go for it. Whatever you enjoy. But I hear a lot of guys that say they want to be a bodybuilder, but they don't train like bodybuilders. It's really weird to me because a CrossFitter knows exactly how they're going to train. They have a very specific way they train.
Yeah.
A powerlifter has a very specific way they train. They wouldn't train like a bodybuilder or a CrossFitter. A strongman has a very specific way they train. They're training for their sport. They would not train like a bodybuilder. But yet guys that are bodybuilders that are training for hypertrophy, they seem to be schizophrenic in their training. They are all over the place. And ultimately, and this is something that I wish I had thought about when I was younger. Ultimately, my goal when I'm in the gym is to provide a stimulus for hypertrophy. That is it. Really, if you really want to distill it down to its essence, it's providing a stimulus to elicit hypertrophy. And strength training is a very, a lot of times, it's not to say that you won't get stronger as you get bigger. So certainly there is a correlation between size and strength, but strength shouldn't be your primary motivator when you're in the gym. That's not to say that you shouldn't progress, but you need to progress within the constraints of form, good form that is putting proper tension on the muscle that you're trying to promote hypertrophy in. I got very obsessed when I was younger with beating PRs, beating the logbook, and I would often compromise my form or not even really. I used to joke, I'd say I just got better at cheating, but that's not necessarily true. And you look at it like with a powerlifters, your job is to get the weight from point A to point B in the most efficient pattern method possible. You want to create your form and technique in such a way that you're going to move that weight with the least amount of tension on the muscle. You're trying to be as efficient as possible. It's the exact opposite for hypertrophy. You probably want to be less efficient in creating leverage and technique. Your goal is to place load on the muscle. Ultimately, that's what matters. So if I had to roll back the clock and tell the 18-year-old me how to train, I would start with that in mind. Get my form tight first for hypertrophy, and specifically for hypertrophy, and then progress the weights. We do know that mechanical tension is the primary driver of hypertrophy, right? I mean, science is pretty well established.
Sure.
And if you're getting stronger within the constraints of good form for bodybuilding and training like a bodybuilding, then we know that you're probably going to grow. If your weight is going up, if you're not getting fatter, then you know that you've added more muscle tissue. Now you'll see an example with the strength, and it's really clear today. You can look around. There are some incredibly strong power lifters now, and some incredibly strong Olympic lifters that aren't that big, man. You look at them, they aren't that big. So clearly, there's something else going on there. There's part of training for strength is training your CNS to move that weight. Part of it is technique. And I'm not saying that those don't play a role in the bodybuilding, but that is not our primary objective. Our primary objective is to provide stimulus, mechanical tension to elicit growth.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I made a video with Professor Bart Kay, who is a professor of was a professor of exercise physiology about a year ago. One of my most popular videos, and there's nothing in it which, listening to it, sounds extra special, but it just makes so much sense, because I get so many clients all the time that'll, check in and say, I want to add in swims 3 times a week. I want to add in farmers walks and, overhead press and clean and jerk. And I'm like, well, these aren't really bodybuilding movements. You can develop a body with them, but ultimately, if you're trying to maximize stimulus, you're going to have to pick quite specific exercises, which are, for the majority of people, going to be a compound with a few isolations here and there. How does your training look right now? So, for example, if you're doing a leg day, for example, what does that look like in terms of maybe frequency, volume sets, reps? Do you focus much on like intensifiers or anything like that?
I've really trained, I also want to touch about how on the changes in contest prep. I got off track on that question, but I'll touch on that. I have really evolved my training over the years. I used to do a lot of forced reps, drop sets, rest pause. I used to do a lot of rest pause when I was younger. And as I've aged, I've found that I have to be very careful with recovery. So I look at it, I look at it as like I play music, but on a guitar, there's, 3 knobs on the amplifier. You've got, your low, your mid, your high. And I look at training the same way. You have volume, you have intensity, and you have load. And if you adjust one or the other of those things, something has to change in the other. If your intensity, or I guess we can toss frequency in there too. So I guess it would be volume, frequency, and intensity. So if your intensity is going up, you're going to need more time to recover. You're going to tolerate less volume. If you want to handle more volume and you want to do more frequency, you're going to have to turn the intensity down. When I was younger, I could get away with cranking all 3 knobs up, right? And so I've followed Dr. Mike Israetel a lot. I recently interviewed him. I know some people find him a bit controversial. There's something he talked about, and I'm not completely aligned with all his philosophies, but I do subscribe to some of the stuff. And what I found that worked really well for me, and I never really considered it with exercise selection and intensifiers, is the stimulus to fatigue ratio. What am I getting out? We talked about just previously about how our job as a bodybuilder is to provide the proper stimulus for hypertrophy. And your choice in exercise and your choice in adding intensifiers are all going to play into the fatigue that you accumulate from that exercise. So you have to ask yourself, is the fatigue that I'm going to accumulate from doing these things worth the stimulus that I'm grabbing? So for me, now being 50 years old, like you talked about a leg day, I think about a leg day now. I don't do barbell squats anymore. People cringe when I say I don't do barbell squats.
I don't either.
You'll talk to most professional bodybuilders and none of them do barbell squats.
None of them. Literally none. Yeah.
No, and everybody eventually comes to the same conclusion. I did a ton of squats when I was younger, and I think there is a point in your training where you need to do squats, but eventually you get so strong that the fatigue cost, the injury risk is so high that it's not worth the stimulus that you get out of it. And squats are not that great at providing, for most people. Some people are built to squat. Like everybody likes to toss out the example of Tom Platz. I mean, look at that guy squat. I mean, he was just born to fucking squat. I'm 6'1". I'm not, man. I'm a leaner when I squat. My torso is longer than my legs. Like, it's just like I'm mechanically not built to squat. So why would I choose an exercise that's going to have a really high fatigue cost that I'm not really getting that great of a stimulus on my quads for, that I have a higher risk of injury, especially as you progress and get stronger. So the risk for injury and the cost of fatigue when you're squatting 225 is not that big of a deal. But when you get up, I was up squatting 495, for 8 to 10 reps. I mean, you're blown out after doing a set of squats, 495 for 8 reps. And you're also taking a huge risk with injury and axial fatigue as well. So I never really considered that until I read Mike's book, The Fundamental Principles of Hypertrophy. Like, I'm like, God damn it, man. I've been doing all these things. Like, so this is a very low return on investment exercise. So I would probably have been better off doing multiple sets of hack squats, or if you want to do a hardcore all out set, do one hardcore, whatever your training method is. But I never really considered that, that there's a shitty stimulus, high fatigue cost, high risk of injury, and it probably was not worth what I was doing. Now that, like I said, that changes with age. That changes as you progress in your journey, as you get stronger. So that's something to consider. I did want to touch on the contest prep thing, how training changes during contest prep. I generally run my same program into contest prep, but I have gotten way more mindful of fatigue as I progress in contest prep. So I generally, as I will I used to be really bad. I used to think that I had to push hard through contest prep. And really, when you consider it, when you see when most bodybuilders, most of the time, when do guys get injured? Most bodybuilders get injured
when they're lean.
When they're lean, right at the end of
Yeah.
contest prep. That is the most dangerous. I mean, Dorian Yates, every time he tore a muscle, it was at the end of contest prep. He ended up having to retire in his mid-30s because of it. You're compromised. Your recovery is compromised. Your joints are dry. It's, so most guys that end up getting injured on contest prep. So I look at contest prep as I have 3 objectives during contest prep. Number 1 is to get as lean and fat free as possible. Number 2 is not to lose muscle. And number 3 is to not get hurt. Those are my 3 objectives on contest prep. So I'm not going to train like I'm going to train in a hypertrophy phase. I'll keep a couple reps in reserve on things. And if I need to pull volume down, I'll pull volume down towards the end. Sometimes I'll just actually lower load and keep the volume higher just for the calories expended. I mean, you look at the guys back in the 70s, none of them did cardio back then. They just trained more. But at the same time, you still have to be conscious of fatigue. This is something where I used to ignore the signals that my body was giving me and would let fatigue accumulate. And then I'd end up looking like shit on stage as a result. So I want to look fresh on stage. I want to make sure that I'm managing fatigue. Because as you do more cardio, there's only so many ways you can split up. Your calories are lower, cardio's up. There's only so much left in the gas tank for training. And if most guys are running a shit ton of anabolics, you should be able to maintain what you have with the anabolics that you have in place. Anyway, that's my rant on that.
That does make sense. I like the fact that you keep bringing back like the objectivity of it. Now, obviously, someone that's getting into this with the first year into bodybuilding, they can be so subjective. They think, oh, I'm fat, oh, I'm too lean, I'm not getting strength. But you have to look at what you're doing for that, almost like a mesocycle, that set period of time. Think, okay, this is a time where this is how big I want to get, or this is how much I think I could realistically gain as a muscle or fat loss. These are my objectives to reach that. Once I feel this way, or this blood marker does this, or my joints hurt, then start looking at things a bit closer. And I think that's one of the benefits of having a coach like yourself, perhaps. It's quite useful because you've been through it all before. Like you said, you've been training for over 30 years. So you know what kind of does and doesn't work. You know what cues to look out for. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that too much. One last thing I wanted to talk about today was a bit about like cardio. Now, obviously, we mentioned about how, bodybuilders in like the 70s, 80s, maybe they trained more, rather than doing 4 sessions a week, 5 sessions, what I've done 10, but they just split up 2 a day sort of thing, whatever. Do you think that now the way that people tend to do it with, their AM 20, 30, 40 minute cardio sessions is better? Or is it quite person specific? I mean, are there some absolute guidelines you'd give to someone who's competing where they, for example, they don't do 2 a day training, or they only train 5 times per week, or this is how many hours of cardio they can reasonably do each day? Or is it just, so individual that you couldn't really speculate?
It is very individual. I'm one of the lucky people that doesn't have to do a lot of cardio to get lean. And I've had some clients I've had to do 2 45-minute sessions a day to get them lean. I maxed out last year at 30 minutes 5 times a week. I mean, that was the most I was doing. Once again, this pulling back and looking at it pragmatically, we have a couple levers that we can pull for fat loss. Sometimes I do think that coaches just throw cardio at people for the sake of doing cardio. You'll go to any local show and you'll see guys up on stage. If you haven't been to a bodybuilding show, go sometime. And you'll see examples of mistakes that people make. There will only be a small handful of people that actually nail conditioning at a local show. And usually the two most common things that I see outside of the people that nail the conditioning, you'll have the guy that looks like he just came out of a forced labor camp.
Yeah.
Right. They look completely emaciated. They look haggard. They look worn down. That's the guy that probably did way too much cardio, got the calories too low, over dieted, maybe took too many drugs. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of variables in there, but basically just overcooked themselves. you'll have the guy that looks like he's like 8 weeks out. You'll have that guy on stage too. And then very few people actually nail the balance. So when it comes to cardio on contest prep, there's really three levers we have that we can pull for fat loss. We can eat less. Really, I mean, we can expend more energy, however you do that, whether it's training more or doing more cardio. And then the other lever that we can pull is performance enhancement. It's, drugs.
Yeah.
The drugs are probably the least effective out of the three. Everybody thinks there's a magic drug they can take for fat loss. Like, for example, I get guys all the time that say, they want to start with clenbuterol right out of the gate. Yeah. And I'm like, bro, I mean, if your BMR is 2,500 calories, and then let's say the clenbuterol gave you a 10% boost, that's half a chocolate chip cookie. Right?
Just don't eat the cookie.
Yeah, right. Just don't eat the fucking cookie. Right. So that's usually the last lever I pull. So, you have to run that balance. I've seen everybody's genetically different. There are some people you can just run through cardio and they never get flat. I'm the exact opposite. If I overdo the cardio, I lose my legs. I get, I become completely depleted looking. I look emaciated. I end up looking like, a 185-pound marathon runner. So I want to use as little cardio as I can get away with. That's sure. There's an appropriate dose, and I don't want to use any more than the appropriate dose. And a lot of times what I'll do on contest prep with people, I'll push them hard in the middle part of the contest prep and then pull back going into a show. I've found that you end up with a better look. I've heard some other guys that coach pros. This is what they do.
Chris Aceto does that. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that, like 8 weeks to about 3 weeks out, that's where you mash the gas pedal down. And then you essentially going into the show, like peak week really should be a deload. Peak week should be more food. You should be getting fresh going into the show. If you're going into the show still trying to lose fat, you're not ready. So my approach is, if we're going to push it, we're going to push it in that middle part of the contest prep. And then we're going to have you ready a few weeks out, and then just sort of coast in the show and get you fresh, get you feeling good going into the show. But for me, cardio is one of those things. I want to use the lowest effective dose. I just have found more times than not, when you're pushing cardio really hard, you end up with a very depleted and stringy look on stage.
Yeah, it does seem to make sense. I mean, the muscles aren't being trained the way they would be to be big. Like you say about slow twitch muscle fibers, you can probably convert a few fast twitch into slow twitch, and that'll, over time, the repeated bout effect of just doing an hour of cardio a day for 20 weeks, the chances are your legs aren't going to be bigger for it. So it makes logical sense.
You've never seen a jacked endurance athlete. They just don't exist, man. They just don't exist. Yeah. So I don't know. I try to pull back and look at these things logically and pragmatically. And that's not to say like I said, there are some people that you have to push cardio with. I have had people where I've had to mash the gas down on cardio because it's just the only way to get them in shape. But usually those people that you need to push the cardio on, they were too fat going into contest prep.
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of times the mistake is made. If you let yourself get too fat in your off season, you're going to have a hard time on contest prep. It's just more cardio, less calories, and you're going to look worse on stage. The more body fat that you have to lose, the more risk you are of losing muscle tissue and being flat going on stage. I don't know. I mean, it's like you said earlier on, everybody has a homeostatic point. I'm probably I think you and I have similar body types. I'm usually off season. I settle in somewhere in that 12 to 15% body fat range. That's kind of where I end up. 15 is probably about the top that I would want to let my body fat get in the off season, because, this year I kept myself closer. I'm only, 18 pounds over my stage weight. So it should be easier getting in shape. Whereas if you have to drop 40, 50 pounds to get in shape for a show, you're probably going to look like shit on stage.
Yeah, I can see that happening. very few bodybuilders pulled it off back in the day. Maybe Ronnie and Jay. But we're talking about like massive people who are, you know, usually above 5'9", above 5'10", you know, go on stage at 290. Like Samson Dowda, Big Ramy, you know.
I mean, you know, here's the thing. Like if Ronnie or Samson Dowda ended up losing 10 pounds of muscle getting on stage, are they going to look any worse? Right. I mean, no,
Yeah.
you know, whereas, you know, if you're barely making the light heavyweight class, you know, you don't have 10 pounds to spare. So you spend so much time and effort accumulating that lean tissue in the off season. I would not want to lose it for the sake of a local show. You know,
Sure.
and I'm not saying that be afraid of being small. You should get lean. I think there are some guys that psychologically get freaked out when they see the scale go down. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just what I'm saying is just there are two types of people in my experience. What I've seen, there's the perma bulker and there's the perma cutter. You know, there are people that can be objective about it, but there's the guy that's always scared of getting fat, and then there's the guy that's always scared of getting small. But you have to be objective about it in whatever phase that you're in.
Yeah, it's interesting you say it, because my best looks personally on stage have been where I've just obviously looked at the photos. I've been, you know, quite subjective, but I've been objective and, well, as just said, right, let's see how light I can get my body weight in the morning. And it works. You know, like you said earlier about, you know, if you're using super supplements of different kinds, it's quite hard to lose muscle mass. And I found that myself, I'd have to dig and eat pretty much nothing to start to lose muscle mass. My strength is always quite even until maybe the last few weeks out, when you're like 4% body fat. But it's just interesting you say that. But for me, like,
you do eat a very high protein diet, so that may factor into it. I don't know. There may be something. You know, I run the exact opposite. I'm running a higher carb diet, so maybe that plays a role in it. Where I just get glycogen depleted coming down, so that's possible. And there's also genetics in it too. Like there's some guys. I have one client that comes to mind. It doesn't matter. I literally had this guy on no carbs and basically no fat for like a month and doing 90 minutes of cardio, and he did not get flat.
Yeah.
You know, he just. But me, if I did that, I would look like absolute crap. That's why you can't really have a one size fit all when it comes to prep. I really focus in on the pictures. I look at the pictures and see how people are responding to the changes that I'm making. And it's a very nuanced thing. And I get really skeptical when I see coaches that have a one size fit all approach to contest prep. You know, because they're going to be outliers. They're going to be people that don't, you know, there's the mean, there's the people that are in the middle, and then there's outliers on both ends of things. So you have to be able to adapt and change for the outliers. I'll tell you, you know, having coached some big dudes too, like guys that are 270, 280, you know, and step on stage at 240, they're a completely different animal to train than somebody that's, you know, a men's physique competitor. It's a completely different approach. They're so heavily muscled that literally just, you know, dropping a little bit of food will lean them up. So every person's different, really. I do think for me, I usually err on the side of being cautious with cardio. But at the same time, it's subjective. You have to look at each person and make an evaluation and see how they're responding and where their best look is at.
Yeah, I find myself, I respond very quickly to cardio, but I also adapt to it quickly, in that my heart rate doesn't start getting to 140 without, I mean, I don't use that as a measurement, but, you know, let's just say, for instance, you know, it doesn't get to 140 unless I really start pushing it beyond the third or fourth week of doing it. For me, doing cardio is like a workout in of itself because of like back and hip pain. It does give me a lot of systemic fatigue. So my cardio is a very slow cycle on the bike, elliptical trainer, just very slowly plodding along. But I've got like a body of an 80-year-old man, so I've got to just taper it back, and I'm not going to be doing 2 hours of cardio a day. So I'd rather sooner eat nothing than do that, because I wouldn't be able to make it to the stage if I can't move.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'd rather eat less than do cardio. But
Yeah.
you know, at the same time, it is a balance. You got to find the balance. I'll start off with higher intensity cardio at the beginning of prep, and then at the end, I'll switch to just walking to manage fatigue, mainly just to manage fatigue.
Sure.
I can't pound. I'm also, you know, older too. When you're younger, you can handle more stress and recover from it. So that's another factor that plays into it. Like you can't have the same approach for a 45 or a 50-year-old that you would for a 25-year-old. You can push somebody like that harder.
For sure, yeah. I used to be crazy. I'd diet on tuna and eggs for 5 months, do an hour and a half of cardio a day, but I just didn't get leaner. It's like in the last collab we did. I was saying I didn't eat for like a week. Was about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and I didn't lose weight. My body is so stubborn. Like at a certain point, it just won't do anything.
Man, I lose weight when I get below 4,000 calories. My metabolism is crazy.
Mine's very adaptive. My body just tends to, if I push it too much in one direction, it just doesn't like it. So I've found needling it around the middle. But what I'm doing now is kind of what you suggested earlier, kind of about, not nailing my diet sooner in terms of cutting really hard. That ease off around about 3 weeks out. And I'm looking at my stats, my rate of fat loss, things like that. And I should be ready in about 4 to 5 weeks. And I've done this before. Yeah. Just the skin tightening, the look starts to improve a bit as you've been leaner for longer, I find.
Yeah, last year that was my best look ever on stage. And I was ready about 4 weeks out. So, I mean, I pretty much stepped on the stage the same weight as I did 4 weeks out. Like you said, I had my skin got thinner and had more of a crisp look on stage, but essentially my weight was pretty much the same the last 4 weeks, and we backed off things a little bit. We, pushed food up just a tad. It's weird with me. Like like if I start adding food back in, my metabolism will start spinning up. I'll lose even more weight at the end. Now I can only get away with that for a certain period of time. It's not, it is fool's gold. It's not like an excuse to go out and eat whatever I want, but it is a temporary thing. But I have noticed that towards the end of prep for me. But some people aren't like that.
A lot of bigger, more muscular sort of competitors will say that, maybe Nick Walker or Phil Heath. I know they said in different podcasts, they said, I get in shape early, then the last few weeks, it's like I have to increase my food because my body is just churning through it. It says to me, your body's probably in that pivotal point where it's like, well, I need to drop something here so I feel more comfortable. So it's going to be protein or fat, I guess. So.
Yeah, I talked about it. My coach, Justin Harris, I mean, he's turned a lot of people pro, and he coaches several pros, and he calls it second bodybuilding. Like once you get to a point where you have a certain amount of muscle mass, that it's just the inertia of you're just a metabolic furnace at that point. And he said, like he said, like really big, heavy, muscular guys are really harder to coach because you have to be very careful. You get this runaway metabolism effect. It's almost like shoveling coal in a fire. The fire burns hotter when you put coal on it. And I've seen that with, I had 1 year where my metabolism just got out of control at the end of prep, and I was losing like a pound a day, man. It was crazy. Didn't matter what I ate. I could eat like 5,000-6,000 calories, and it was just, I kept losing weight. It was insane. So I know I have to be careful. I usually, like last year, I pulled the fat burners out completely at the end. Yeah. I wasn't running anything. I had to keep from melting away size. But then there's that poor soul that you have to just murder to get them in shape.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I'll have to investigate that one because I've heard it so many times. There must be a reason for it. Lyle McDonald's spoken about it before. He's not a nutritionist, but a fat loss kind of expert, I guess you might say. He says, you'll diet for a period of time, then nothing will happen. Then you get like a whoosh effect. And all of a sudden everything starts coming off. That's it. Yeah.
Kurt and Dr. Dean St. Mark, they just did a video. It was a really good one. It's up on Kurt Haven's channel about the whoosh effect. It's a really, really, really good effect. Really good video. So yeah, I find that too. Like I'll start off my, like usually it's always the same thing with me. Like at the beginning of contest prep, I'm not really losing weight. And then just all of a sudden it's like I get in that 10 to like 4 week range and it just starts rolling. It may have something to do with trend though. I don't know.
Good old trend. Trend bologna sandwiches. There you go.
Trend turns me into a furnace, man.
Yeah, that's one over here. In the UK versus US, PED scene's quite different. I mean, the way we tend to look at things is we sprinkle a lot of things in, whereas I think the US guys are like a gram of test, 20 IUs of GH, and they tend to like load a few things, but the UK people seem to sprinkle things in, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's very different.
From what I could tell.
Yeah, I have talked to, like JP and all those guys. It's a very different approach. I find that the UK guys tend to be harder trainers, than over here. It seems to be more volume. UK guys tend to be more of, take everything, maybe it's the Dorian Yates effect. I don't know, where he's
30 years later.
He's left his mark on UK bodybuilding, but we identify UK bodybuilders over here as being hardcore. If you can get the approval of the UK bodybuilders, you've made it. They're the guys that are the toughest of the tough.
Yeah, that is true. When we think about maybe like the top 10 UK bodybuilders that have been pros, you could think probably about 8 of them are well known for being like tough ass fuckers, like Yates, you got Jordan Peters, James, obviously. There's quite a few other guys, but a lot of the guys are in the shadows still. I've seen some absolute monsters in different gyms, and I'm like, is that guy pro? Oh no, he just trains the hell of it. I'm like, why does he not compete? Just put some trunks and see what happens,
I mean, it's people just love it. I mean, I would do it even if I wasn't competing, man. I'm obsessed with this stuff. I have been my whole life since I was a teenager. I go through phases where I, come back, back off of it or a little bit, but I do love bodybuilding. It's been a passion my entire life.
Yeah, for sure. Same for me, really. Well, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up now. So for anyone that, thank you for coming on. So for anyone that's interested in your stuff, I do recommend you as a coach. You've got obviously a YouTube channel, Instagram, website, you do different consults and things. So if you want to say what some of the links are to that, and obviously I'll put them in the show notes below. Yeah,
I have an Anabolic e-course we put together. We've put a lot of time into it. I've worked with Kurt Havens, who is a researcher on androgens. He had worked in the pharmaceutical industry, a very, very sharp guy, working on his PhD in endocrinology right now. We put together an Anabolic e-course. It's a science-based Anabolic e-course. It is up on my Anabolic Bodybuilding website, anabolicbodybuilding.com, and all my information's over there. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm Paul K. Barnett, or you can check out my YouTube channel, Anabolic Bodybuilding.
Nice one. Cheers for that. So I'll put that below, obviously. And if you guys do have any questions, fire them away to his channel. If you put them on mine, I might put a heart on them, but I won't ask them. Yeah, I don't respond to too many. And if they're about gear, I don't respond because I'm not an expert. I don't know enough about it. I'm not going to pretend I am. I'd rather send you forward to Paul. All right. Cheers, guys.
Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.